Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos weekly for a twofold basis. The first reason for doing that is to just take my brain out of the mode of preparation and background work as I work with the text and kind of ponder on it and look at it and read it and think about it and see how it applies to life and all that happy stuff over the course of the week, and then move into the point of actually writing and preparing a sermon that I'll preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason. The second reason, just to allow you, the viewer, who have stumbled across this for whatever reason, to gain some different insight into the gospel text. So that's kind of why I do these. This one, if you are a regular viewer, you find is a day early. Writing or doing this one up on Thursday rather than Friday, which is when I typically do them. As we are moving into Holy Week and the busyness of that schedule, I'm trying to work ahead just a little bit as I've got an extra sermon to pack into the next 7 days. So that's why I'm doing this on Thursday instead of Friday. This particular weekend, which is March 20th, 2016, Palm Sunday. Just a word about that. Some congregations will call this Passion Sunday, and they'll combine it with Palm Sunday. And so, in the course of this one day, they'll kind of try and cover the entirety of Holy Week, starting with Palm Sunday and the Triumphal Entry, and including the events that lead up through Maundy, Thursday, through Good Friday, the death of Jesus, in preparation for the resurrection on Easter, which will be next week. I don't really buy into that. There's no problem with that for congregations that choose to do things that way. I stick with just Palm Sunday, and then I let Maundy, Thursday be Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday be Good Friday. So those worship opportunities are still there for those who choose to partake in them. So all that being said, Palm Sunday, which is the focal point of, at least here in my congregation. The gospel text comes from Luke chapter 19, verses 28 through 40. And as I mentioned before, it's the story of the triumphal entry as Jesus comes into Jerusalem here at the beginning of the week for his final week, which will culminate in his death on the cross on Friday. So all that being said, Jesus is talking. He's actually just finished up a parable within the realm of Jericho, which is on his way to Jerusalem. It's a city not too far away from Bethlehem. So he's going through Jericho, and he's actually encountered Zacchaeus, if you're familiar with that story. And then he tells a parable, and that's what leads into this. And I say all that because the opening is kind of a wrap up of that. After he had said this, what I was just talking about, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. When he had come near Bethpage and Bethany, at the place called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of the disciples, saying, "Go into the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it.'" So those who were sent departed and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They said, "The Lord needs it." Then they brought it to Jesus, and after throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus upon it. As he rode along, people kept spreading their cloaks on the road. As he was now approaching the path down from the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the deeds of power that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." He answered them, "I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out." All right, so that's the story. And as per usual, this is one of those stories that we kind of all have this mental image of when we think of the Triumphal Entry or Palm Sunday. And as per usual, when we have these mental images of what we tend to think of in terms of these stories, it's a combination of all the different accounts kind of put together. They call that harmonization. Another example that we see of this is the birth narrative or the nativity, that we kind of pull aspects from different accounts and we kind of mash them all together and we think that's what is going on. This one is another situation of that. Now, the triumphal entry appears in all four Gospels. And there are some similarities, certainly, between all of them, but there are some differences as well. For instance, a major difference, did you hear anything in that reading about palm branches? And the answer is no. In fact, the only place where we hear about palms is in John's account. Now, we do hear in Mark that they had collected clumps of basically grass, and they were laying the grass out in the road in front of Jesus, but nowhere in the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, does it actually talk about palms. And here in Luke, we don't even hear about leafy branches. It's just the cloaks of the people that are spread out in the road in front of Jesus. So that's one difference that we see. Another one, what's going on here is in terms of what's actually being said. Now, Luke's account is the only one where the people actually holler out, blessed is the King who comes, basically naming Jesus King. And additionally, another thing that's unique here in Luke is the response of the Pharisees. Within the other Gospels, all three of the other Gospels, there is no opposition in terms of the triumphal entry. Now, there's opposition pretty quickly after that, because immediately following this, Jesus goes into the temple, and it's the cleansing of the temple, and the leaders get ticked off about that. But interestingly enough, even in that opposition that comes later, and again, not portion of this, but what comes directly next, we don't hear that the Pharisees are among those who are opposing Jesus. And I'm taking all of this into account for a specific reason. The direction that I'm going with this sermon is really focusing on the Pharisees, focusing on that opposition that seems to come up. Now, typically the Pharisees, I usually call them the biblical bad guys, because they tend to be representatives of the group that are always opposing Jesus. The thing to remember about the Pharisees, did they have status? Yes, they did. Were they oftentimes upper class? Probably so. But the thing to remember about the Pharisees was essentially, for lack of a better word, a Jewish denomination. And there were different groups within the Jewish culture, within the Jewish religious structure, that had different theological understandings. We hear often about the Sadducees along with the Pharisees, and oftentimes they get lumped in together. But they had very, very different views on certain topics, certain theological notions. And much like we do in our Christian denominational structure today. And so, in that situation, we question the motives of the Pharisees. Excuse me. But before we do that, I need to back up just a little bit, and I need to paint a little picture of the setting of everything that's going on here. We hear as Jesus is coming in, whether it's this account or the other accounts, that he's riding a donkey, that people are spreading their cloaks, and they're shouting, they're praising God. Here it's blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Other places we just hear Hosanna to the Son of David, who will reestablish or the reestablishment of the throne. Basically, they're recognizing Jesus as King, and that's what's happening here in this triumphal entry. And whoever it is, Luke's gospel makes a point of separation. Within the Greek, there's two different words that are used for our translation of crowd. We hear the disciples from the crowd, and that's one that kind of means the crowd of people who are known. And then the Pharisees from the multitude or from the crowd, and that's a different word that kind of means like a faceless mob. So there is that separation. That's not the direction I'm going with this, but that is present here. So we have the setting of the recognition of King. The King that's coming in. This prophecy, which is actually named verbatim or used verbatim in Matthew's account, comes from the prophet Zechariah, that talks about the King will come riding on the colt of a donkey, or the foal of a donkey. And that's what's happening here. Now we get kind of an image that Jesus is either setting this up ahead of time, or he is just recognizing that it will happen, and he's using some of his divine insight to say to these random two disciples, whichever two they are, hey, go find this colt, and if anybody asks you, just say the Lord needs it. Um, what's interesting about this account, this poor donkey seems to be conscripted into into the usage of the Lord, because this is the one where it does not say, or he does not instruct the disciples that he will bring him back immediately after he's done with it. The donkey just kind of gets brought to Jesus, and then we never hear about it again after he rides it. So does he keep it? Do the people get it back? We don't know. That's just a side note, something that I think is kind of funny. But regardless, so we have Jesus riding the colt. We have the people all exclaiming with joy, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." The setting is getting ready for Passover. Passover is one of the three big-time festivals in the Jewish culture. And some will argue it's the most important one. Others will argue against that and say that it's a secondary one, but it's still important, but not the number one. That doesn't really matter. The important thing to keep in mind is that as one of the major Jewish festivals, Jewish people from all over the known world would be coming into Jerusalem, because that's where the temple is. That is the center of their culture and always has been, going all the way back to King David, some roughly 950 years before this. Despite any political changes that have gone on, it's the capital. So it's an important place. And Passover, in its very beginning, if you are familiar, Passover was established between God and Moses and the Israelites as the time when they were freed from slavery in Egypt, because the angel of the Lord passed over the Israelites' houses, causing death and destruction within the Egyptian culture, and they were freed. So there's a political slant to this religious festival that's going on. So all that's happening. And keep in mind now that the Israelite people, or the Jewish people, are under the control of the Roman government, the Roman Empire. And because of the large mass of people, anytime from the Roman standpoint, anytime there's a huge gathering of people like this, it's dangerous, because when like-minded people band together, they may quickly begin to oppose you. Because of that, that's why Pilate is present in Jerusalem. We'll hear about him at the end of the week in the trial of Jesus. But Pilate, who is the governor of the area, he's present. Ordinarily, he would not be in Jerusalem. It's not a place he goes to a lot. But he's there. The Roman presence is much greater to control the people, to make sure that there's no riots or mobs or whatever. So we've got that direction or that tension going on here. And so all of this is going, and now we have this group of people who's loudly proclaiming, as they're coming into the city, probably going right past a bunch of Romans, of blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the new King. And who knows what else they were shouting and hollering, but we hear in some of the other Gospels about the reestablishment of the throne. That sounds an awful lot like insurrection against Rome. And would have to that. And ironically, side note, that's what Jesus is eventually crucified for insurrection. So there's a lot of foreshadowing going on here. And so coming full circle, now having set the scene for that, it raises the question of what is the motivation of the Pharisees to say, hey, hush the people up. They're not actually opposing, or they don't seem to be opposing what is being said about Jesus. They don't seem to be opposing Jesus himself, but they pull him aside and say, hey, tell your disciples to keep quiet. And so I've really been questioning what's their motivation for that. And considering that they have influence, they're high up in the social structure. They know how the world works. They're my guess, and kind of my thought is are they actually, misguided though they may be, are they trying to look out for the people? Are they trying to keep the peace? Perhaps you've heard of the Pax Romana, that refers to the notion under Roman rule that if you paid your taxes and you kind of kept your head down, they'd leave you alone. They'd let you have your culture. They may take advantage of you, but they're not going to destroy you. But if things get a little haywire and you start to oppose them, then they're going to lay waste. That seems to be what the Pharisees are wanting to avoid. They want to maintain the peace of the status quo. And what's interesting about all this is that Jesus is bringing about this great change, this great reversal I've talked about in previous videos. This utter new thing within our reality, and it is the kingdom of heaven which comes with him. Now, do we fully understand it yet? No, we don't, and won't until Jesus comes back again. But this peace, quote unquote peace, that the Pharisees hope to maintain is not God's peace. It's not the peace that he's intended. It's not that life abundant that God has intended for us. And that's what Jesus is bringing in, that life in relationship with one another and in relationship, unbroken relationship with God. It's not the peace as the world knows peace, which is usually, hey, we're stronger than you, so don't oppose us and we'll have peace. But if you do oppose us, we'll destroy you. That's not peace. That's bullying, essentially. And that's not what Jesus has intended. So that's kind of the direction that I'm aiming at with this sermon. As Jesus is entering into the capital, as he's coming in to bring about this great change, the opposition that he is facing perhaps has good intentions, or the best intentions, and is not necessarily thinking about themselves, although I'm sure they were thinking about themselves as well, but they're thinking about the people. Like, for them, the good of the people is for you guys to shut up so we don't get killed. But Jesus has something else in mind. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, please share those down in the comment section. Otherwise, I hope you have a great week. May God be with you as we enter into Holy Week and create in you a sense of the importance of everything that's going on. We'll be back again sooner rather than later, as I've got a Monday, Thursday sermon pending. So look for that probably early next week sometime. And then the Easter one coming right up on its heels about a week from now. So God bless, and we'll catch you next time.